First, dry lay all the carpet according to roll sequence. Remember, the sequence can be determined by the date, time, back stamp, or label on the carpet back, or by the roll tag SCQ number. Roll sequence is a starting place but can vary depending on pattern length, as we will discuss shortly under pattern elongation. Row cut the carpet along the selvage edge that will butt to the wall. This step is important in order to keep the carpet aligned with the length walls. Continue to lay out the remaining breadths of carpet and trim the seams according to pattern match. As you can see, the pattern lines are not straight across the width. We have both bow and skew in this carpet. Bow is a curved pattern line across the width, but the selvage edges are square with the selvage edge. With skew, the pattern lines are straight but are angled or out of square with the selvage edge. With this carpet, we have both a curved line across the width or bow, and this curved pattern is angled across the width or skew. Determine the amount of direction of bow and or skew with a laser square, or string and framing square. We have placed masking tape along the pattern in order to make it more visible to you, the viewer. We are using a laser square to determine that our skew is 2 1/4 inch, as you can see from our tape measure. This is beyond Shaw's manufacturing tolerance for bow and skew of 1.5 inch across the 12-foot width. Even with the skew bow beyond manufacturing tolerances, this carpet can be successfully installed with the pattern line straight. It is important to remember that carpet that is within bow or skew tolerance has an installed tolerance of 0. These tolerances are within what a qualified installer is able to correct to 0 or straight. Select a prominent width wall and cut the carpet exactly on pattern across the width. If cut and positioned correctly, a bowed pattern will have both seam edges turned up the wall with the center of the carpet just touching the wall. A skewed pattern will be turned up the wall on one edge and the other side of the breadth will be just touching the wall. In our installation, we have both bow and skew. The left side of each breadth is turned up the wall only about 1 inch, and the right seam edge is turned up our wall 2 1/4 inch, the amount of the skew. Position each drop in the same manner. Now the carpet is dry laid in the entire area by roll sequence, and the seams were cut by the proper method. Fold the carpet back from the wall and spread Shaw 1000 or Shaw 1200 adhesive using a 1/8 inch U-notch trowel. Allow the adhesive to become tacky and string to the touch before laying the carpet into the adhesive. Fans or air movers will greatly reduce the time needed for the adhesive to become tacky. Fold the carpet into the adhesive and roll. Remember, we have a bow and skew in this carpet. The outside edge pattern has a small hook in the pattern that must be straightened. Using a mini stretcher, pull the bowed or skewed edges down off the wall and net the wall with the carpet widthwise edge. This will cause a bubble that tapers off toward the center of the breadth. Use the mini stretcher to move this bubble to the opposite end of the breadth. As the bubble is moved down the wall, the pattern deviation is corrected behind the bubble. Roll again. Now we are ready to construct the first seam. You will notice that we have taped the seam in order to make matching a small pattern easier. Try this technique the next time you have a small pattern installation. It is much easier than counting the number of patterns in, say, 12 feet of length to determine which side of the seam has the short pattern and long pattern. Basically, all we are going to do is make a larger pattern out of a small one. Here's how it's done. After all the carpet has been dry laid in the area to be installed, start with your first seam and match the pattern at an end wall. Place a short piece of tape across the seam and cut the tape directly over the seam so that half the tape is on one side of the seam and half is on the other. Use a knee kicker or mini stretcher to match the pattern along the seam. Shift the short side to match the longer side. Every 3 to 4 feet, place additional tape across the seam and cut it in the same manner as the first. When the opposite end of the seam is matched, go back and look at the first piece of tape. The distance between the two strips of tape is the total distance the pattern is off along the entire length of the seam. Repeat this process for each seam. Fold the carpet on each side of the seam back. Now we spread adhesive with the U-notch trowel. Use fans to reduce open time. Once the adhesive is tacky, fold in the first side of the seam. We use a hawkbill knife to create a trough in the adhesive along the seam so that the adhesive does not build up on the tip of the sealer bottle. Apply shawl seam sealer to the seam edge of the carpet. Apply the sealer to the cut edge. Seam sealer is required on all of Shaw's broadloom carpet. Fold the remaining side into the adhesive. Using a mini stretcher again, pull the carpet off the wall so that the carpet butts to the wall. Again, notice the bubble that appears when we do this. This bubble needs to be moved to the opposite end of the seam. As the bubble is moved down the seam, the pattern is straightened. At the opposite end of the seam, this bubble is needed to close the gap where the carpet bows away from the wall. Some installers start on this end and stretcher the carpet to close the gap, but with our method, we are only twisting the carpet around, not stretching it. Stretching can cause more pattern deviations than what you started with. Don't panic if you have bubbles like this one. These are common and will be flat when you reach the end of the seam. With a bow or skew, the seam edge or edges will have to be moved the greatest distance to straighten the pattern. The center section of the carpet will have to be moved less distance to straighten the pattern. Match the masking tape edges as you move down the seam. Once the bubbles are moved to the opposite end and are flat, use the mini stretcher to close any gaps at the seam and give the smaller pattern match, not the tape pattern, any final adjustments necessary. Tractor the seam. Use a string or laser to gauge pattern straightness. Stay nails may be helpful but are often not needed with tacky adhesive. Let's take another look at what our installation looked like before we straightened it. Now let's look at how our finished installation has straight pattern lines and a matched pattern at all seams. By using these techniques, you can make many satisfied customers and a job that you can be proud of.